So I'm not going to keep you long. There is going to be an interesting, lively conversation in the panel, but I just wanted to share some thoughts and some examples of where I think power in business has been done well, and perhaps where it hasn't been done so well. Now, why are you still seeing a fearsomely large me behind you? There we go. Good. That's what I wanted to show you. Possibly the world's largest dried apricots. But this is where my journey began. Victoria's began with tremendous frustration. Mine began at the same time that my son is, at the same age that my son is now. So just turned a teenager. And I used to get dragged along every Sunday to my church by my parents. And I used to run my dad's fair trade stall. And that's really, I think, where I first understood that there was a different way of doing business, a different way of doing economics. I also developed a really sharp sales technique, which was to basically say to all of those in the congregation who had just been praying and singing to Jesus and asking for his forgiveness, that how could they possibly be doing that and not buying my fair trade dried apricots? So that seemed to work, and we were quite successful. But I learned that this was a model, an alternative model, where power could be shared. Now, when I got the brief, firstly, for this session, it was around female empowerment, equality, gender equality, human rights. And my first thought went to a project, an initiative that I had studied a few years ago in Kenya. And that was a project where an organization were basically helping women in their homes develop business opportunities to create products and services, products that they could sell in the marketplace. Why were they needing to do that? Because climate change was having a devastating effect on their husbands' pastoralism. So they were struggling to bring the same level of income they had previously. The women needed to go to the market in order to generate income for the household. Now, we were looking at what impact that would have on the well-being of the household. And of course, there was a material economic well-being impact, but by far the greatest impact was on the women's ability to dictate and drive decisions around the household budget. They got agency as a result of being a part of the economic generating sort of machine that was their household. Okay? So this was really, really interesting that, you know, that feeling of empowerment, that key to well-being really, really came through when you gave a degree of power to that individual. Now, a little closer to home, but around the same time a few years ago, I was conducting a well-being survey for this business. This business is a business called John Lewis and Waitrose. It's a UK retail business of around £5 billion per annum with a staff of around 75,000. Now, one of the things that they're very famous for is they have an annual staff bonus, and it's presented on the news with much fanfare, and it can often equate to 20% of staff annual salaries. In this instance, it seems to have been not such a good year. It was just 10%, but it was still celebrated. Now, when I did this survey, I assumed that this bonus would be one of the primary sources of well-being for the staff. However, it wasn't. The number one driver in our survey of well-being for the staff was the power that the staff felt through being joint owners of the business and having the ability to vote on matters relating to the business. So for anyone who doesn't know John Lewis and Waitrose, they form the John Lewis Partnership, which is the UK's largest cooperative. So between fair trade, the example in Kenya, John Lewis and Waitrose, three examples where genuine power derived from different ownership really, really drove well-being. But not all business arrangements are that way. I'm going to focus just for a minute or two on the apparel industry. So the fashion industry really over the last few decades has been hit by a series of human rights and tragedies. Yes, there have been new accords which have been established to improve working conditions, but abuse doesn't just equal powerlessness. It equals powerlessness plus the extractive nature of the business arrangements between actors in the supply chain. And I'll give you just one example of that. When I was in Cape Town, I went to a supply chain conference, and there was a multinational organization with long supply chains into the developing world in the room. And they'd recently advertised the role of a buyer. They wanted to bring new people into the business to act as buyers for the supply chain. Amazingly, the advert for that buyer simply stated, "Someone else pays." When you have that type of mindset and those type of incentive systems, you're going to see a form of extraction down your supply chain, which is not akin to a well-being economy. Now, nowadays, arguably, the extractive nature of the apparel industry can be seen in the acceleration of waste clothing provided, or generated rather, by fast fashion. So, can we solve all of this just with employee ownership? Well, obviously the answer is no. Do we need all stakeholders in the conversation? I would absolutely say yes. And critically, I believe we need to bring one particular stakeholder into that conversation and directly onto the board. And this is what the following organizations have done. And that stakeholder is nature. Now, this is not a car. This is actually access to mobility. You can't purchase it, you lease it, and you lease all of the things to do with it. So you have access to it, the fuel is paid. The fuel, incidentally, is hydrogen. You pay in your monthly payment also for insurance, maintenance, etc., etc. It's not a purchase of a material good. But that's not the most interesting thing about this slightly weird-looking vehicle. I think the most interesting aspect to the business is that in its governance structure, it has 6 custodians, each representing a fundamental part of modern life. So it has the customers, the community, the staff, the investors, the commercial partners, but it also has nature as a custodian. And it also has a stewardship board, which ensures that the board of the company abides by its fiduciary responsibilities, which are to balance and protect the benefit streams to each of these stakeholders. This was the only way that they felt that they could ensure that nature was not put second. Here's another great example. So this is a cosmetics company, Faith in Nature. And why have I highlighted them? Well, they've always considered nature to be the boss. But a few years ago, they actually wanted to explore what would that actually mean to make nature the boss. And so they engaged an organization called Lawyers for Nature, who held the belief that the rights of nature will be for the 21st century what human rights was for the 20th century. So in August of 2022, they became the first company in the world to appoint nature to its board. Nature became a director of the company. Nature had a vote, same as any other director. And that non-executive role was designated to act on behalf of nature, a person separate to the company so they could feel they could act independently of the company. Now, going on a bit of a tangent on you, Michael. Well, possibly, yes. I did start off by saying that the brief I was given was to talk about gender, economy, and well-being in the workplace. But the reason I have slightly veered off is because we are talking about business leadership in fostering well-being economies. And well-being economies is not simply the well-being of humans. Well-being economies is thriving humans and a thriving planet. We need to be thriving within planetary boundaries. Now, 2 weekends ago, there was a fantastic conference introducing the well-being economy in Denmark. And of course, today we are here in Iceland. Now, both of these countries are fated for their levels of human well-being, but both countries use the equivalent of 4 to 5 planets worth of resources to achieve that human well-being. Good lives do cost the earth in this instance. But I want to leave you with a final thought on how to perhaps marry the human and the environmental from a business perspective. And that is the notion of recycling, but not recycling of just tons and tons of plastic. I'm talking about really moving beyond the extractive nature of business and finance, as I alluded to it before. So I used to run an economics consultancy, a successful economics consultancy in London. We had a shareholder. We looked to maximize the value, the profit to that shareholder. But the difference was, this shareholder was a foundation. 100% of the profits after reinvestment that my team made for our shareholder went to radical economic thinking aligned with human and planetary well-being. We recycled all of our profits for social and ecological ends. This is why I think we have to think, when we talk about the social, the environmental, and the economic, that really it is the economy in service of the social and the environmental. It's not three equal pillars. It is one in service of the others. So I'll just leave you with that thought. Ownership by workers and by nature, I do think, equals business leadership compatible with a well-being economy. Thank you.